Okay, the next speaker, I am completely delighted, not that I wasn't delighted with you, Alan and Oresti, but he is my CEO, and the minute I mentioned Pamro to Urel, my other team member from New York, and James, they're like, we're coming. I didn't tell them it was Mauritius. Okay, that was an added bonus. So, James is the CEO of Splashlight and Telmar. Splashlight is a New York-based company, as is Telmar, which has become the leading photography and video provider for retailers and brands. So he's brought the sexiness to the Telmar data and is breathing a new lease on life into all of our offices globally. James also does podcasts on creative intelligence and did one in South Africa, which he was delighted with. And today he's going to speak to us about leveraging AI in the marketing and creative process. Welcome, James.
Thank you. It's really a privilege to be here. I have to say, it's my first time in Africa, and I really thank you. And I'm quite humbled at the spirit of ingenuity, the pursuit of trying to achieve technology. The podcast that I interviewed on Friday was really, really stirring. And first of all, the amount of sponsors here and to be among you in this industry is really a pleasure. And I appreciate what I'm hearing and what I'm learning. I'm new to this industry, and I'll tell you just a little bit of background about myself and my partner and how we're here. We invest in the intersection of creativity, technology, and human science. And we have a particular reason we invested in Telmar. Splashlight, as you mentioned, is one of the leading content creators in the United States. And we also have a technology division. And we worked heavily in the past few years creating technology that lets us understand the emotions behind images. And that led us into this area here. And we believe we have some stirring and pretty exciting things to be introducing in the next coming quarters that really will create some momentum. And what we're most excited about, that what we're going to be doing, is we're going to be pioneering that here in Africa. We've been in Telmar 36 years servicing in South Africa, and that is just something we're very, very proud of. And there's an incredible heart of innovation here. So while we're going to take us on a journey, none of what I'm really saying is from myself. What we're going to talk about, and we're going to show you these things, is through this podcast this past year, I've been able to interview and talk to some of the most brilliant people. And this is what they're saying. This is a collection of what they're thinking. And what you're going to see here in this is there's a movement. There is something that we need to get behind if we're going to excel in the world that we're living in with digital and technology. And we're going to take you through that theme. And you're going to see this begin to develop. And again, I'm new to this industry, but I have a passion for understanding people and a passion for how do we do what we do and connect, and not just see people, but connect with people. And so we're going to go through that. And how is creativity so important? Well, if you want to create, you have to know what you're creating for, right? Creativity. But we're about this term, creative intelligence, and we're going to take you through that as we're talking about it, because we're going to move through what AI is doing in the creative world. And to create, you have to know your audience, you have to know so much, and there's so much happening in this whole sector, and it's really, really exciting. So this journey behind this podcast, this Creative Intelligence podcast, has been really stirring, and I encourage you, if you get a chance, to see some of it, because I'm only going to cover a few of the incredible, intelligent people that I've been talking to about this topic and how it's going to be relevant to all of us here in this room. This common thread you're going to see, I'm excited to kind of reveal here in Mauritius. And so we'll take you through that. So let's begin with some of the first two people on the podcast was Katie Hillier. She's a leading digital anthropologist. And that's a term we're going to come back to often. It's digital anthropology. And Chris Duffy, he's the senior strategic development manager at Adobe. What these two talked about was how ready the creative world really is for AI and for technology. And typically you might think creatives might not want technology, but actually they really are thirsty for what it can do. But in particular, I want to focus on some of the things that Katie a digital anthropologist brought to mind. And we challenged her on it. When you listen to it, you can hear. And it really has to do with digital anthropology. Now, why we say that? Why is digital anthropology something we're talking about? Well, in general, anthropology is the study of how we live. But in the world now that we live in with digital, we live differently. And digital anthropology needs to be part of that. And so we talked to her about that. Because what's interesting about data science is that data science is finding where we live, right? How we live digitally. But we're also asking data scientists to analyze us. But they're not the right people to do that. And when we were talking with Katie, we used a little illustration about ships. And we said, so if you wanted to go study Peru, let's say 100 years ago, anthropologists would go down to Peru and study ayahuasca, come back and analyze that person. But if it was 600 years ago, you couldn't even get to Peru. We didn't know how to sail below the equator. We didn't have the technology to get to Peru from London. But when that technology invented, you have the ships, the navigators. Did we ask the captains of the ships and the navigators to study the people? No. They're not qualified for that. You need anthropology for that. But we're living in a world where data scientists are studying how we live. And they're the ones advising. So Katie was really stirring about this change. And you're going to see this coming back as we go through this here, about how important anthropology, particularly digital anthropology, its role is going to play. Something we'll bring it back around to. But again, I then talked to one of the most brilliant young women that I have ever met. Rami is a neuroscientist, University of Cambridge, Stanford, the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences. She is amazing. And what's interesting about her when we talk to her is the ways that technology is decoding the human brain, cognitive studies of the human brain. What's interesting about this is she developed the very first AI cognitive assistant. And what was that? What was interesting is her career working for Mercedes-Benz. She was trying to understand, and I'll go to this next one here. She was trying to understand people and the cognitive regions of the brain. But what she noticed is that it's a very lengthy process. So because typically what you do is you connect, excuse me, I'm sorry, my voice is like this. You connect to different regions of the brain, and you watch that activity, and you show the person prompts. So what they did is she developed a way to let the AI analyze the brain activity and change the prompts. So it took 2 months, you could do in 2 hours. So you're seeing how AI is changing the process. And that, again, applies as marketers and creatives. We need to understand people. We need to know how they react. And so here again, this was science in around, oh, pardon me 1 second. I don't know how I can open this. I actually had shoulder surgery last week, so I'm supposed to have a sling on. And I'm supposed to be in New York. But anyway, yeah, this is a hologram, actually. I'm really at the spa. No. But anyway, she was fascinating. So it's fascinating. So that's a very interesting concept now, that AI can participate automatically in how we think and unlocking the human brain and understanding that. Then I talked to Richie Manu. He's the author of a book called Author of You, Rebranded, and he's a senior lecturer at the MA program in Applied Imagination in Central St. Martin's in London. Now, why he's interesting and worth talking about for us, and what's the lesson we learned here, he advocates paying attention to other industries and adjacent industries and how they're using AI and technology and how that can make a play in your industry or in our industry. And for instance, he talked about fashion. And it was really interesting how he used fashion as a way, as a designer, to provoke some ideas. Because what's happening in the fashion world, he mentioned, is that they're using AI to look for fashion styles that are missing, so that they can go to their creative team to develop what seems to be missing in the world. So here you're using AI in order to help understand what to create, And how do we do that in ours? Well, that's for us as researchers, as marketers, as advertisers to figure out. But here's where AI is getting used in an industry to service creativity by helping them understand what's missing. And he called this something called the curiosity bandwidth. And he said great leaders and those that in each industry that have a curiosity bandwidth are the ones who are going to continue to succeed because they're looking outside what they do every day for innovations and ideas. So it really was a great takeaway with him. And then another point that we talked about was Wambo Wu. Now, Wambo Wu is an Emmy Award-winning executive director at Wired Magazine. And why did we pick him? Well, first of all, Wired Magazine reaches over 30 million people a month. But he built and directed a documentary entitled Machine Learning, Living in the Age of AI. But not from a perspective of those that make AI, but from a perspective of those who use AI. And he highlighted in his documentary, which was at Cannes, won an award at Cannes just a couple months ago, about three groups: children, farmers, and senior citizens. And it's really interesting how each of those are affected by AI and their reaction to the AI. And it really is a thought, because one had created mobility, senior citizens, then you see with driverless cars helping them, then there was how kids learn, then it had to be with how farmers are enabled to do things. It was really interesting. And if we go to this next one here, what he was remarking is that all of those groups, when he interviewed them for his documentary, surprisingly accepted and adopted AI. So what's the lesson in that for us here? Again, it's flexibility. AI and the way we use data and the way we analyze data is changing the world and includes us as marketers, as researchers, as creatives, something we can't be afraid of. We have to adapt. And as we see children adapting, we see senior citizens adapting, and arguably you see farmers who can be considered maybe the ones that are not progressive. They're rapidly progressing and accepting these things. But then we kind of dived into something that was interesting with him. And because he had so much that he had studied and learned making this documentary that he ended up having quite a bit of opinions. And he was a journalist before he was making films. And so we then began talking about AI as a learning machine and what that does around creativity. And he had a lot to say about this. It's interesting, some of the facts of what's happening around AI and in the art world and in film. He talked about one film, but I didn't even know about this. In 2016, there's a film called Sunspring. And this was built and written by AI. Now, he said it was kind of clumsy. Of course, he's a director and he's a producer. He does his own things. But here there's AI making paintings. AI is making films. There's even an AI, one podcast, there's an AI writing a book that's going to come out shortly. So what's happening? Are they really creating? Are these machines creating? Well, that's not for us necessarily to say, but you see there's change taking place. And that's why we're calling this term creative intelligence. It's changing. And how are we adapting? How are we as professionals opening our minds to this and absorbing this? But again, we're going to come back to digital anthropology here. We're going to come back to that. So overall with Wambo, I was really left with a man who's not a scientist. He's not a data scientist. He's not a person who's in our industry of research. But yet he saw himself, if you come out of the weeds of what's going on in AI and you move yourself back, he saw a much bigger picture, that there are meaty philosophical issues that are at play here. It has to do with ethics. We talked about how there's an AI news reporter in China. It's a television that's just AI. The news coming up with its own, talks on its own, generating news. So there's a lot happening behind that when you take a look at that. How we live is changing because of technology. That led us to another interesting one we had. And this gentleman was exceedingly brilliant about this one particular topic, and it has to do with ethics. Because if we're getting into creativity, if we're getting into using data, if we're getting into understanding the mind, if we're letting machines go that far, as we heard Alan talk about it, and I was really excited that he mentioned about the topic of social justice and ethics, it matters. How we get exploited, how we use data, the right to privacy, all of this is really an interesting questions that needs to be answered, even though we're just in creativity or in marketing. All of that matters. But he really talked about it. He said that he didn't see AI as neither good nor bad, but it's just fundamentally neutral. It's just what's happening, but it's how it gets used. So he talked about bias and how adding bias and understanding bias, and that is something that's going to be very, very important. He even talked about that it's going to have rights. AI and things has rights. So it was a very fascinating and philosophical discussion. But we agreed really on that ethics are a key issue, that these tools and technology can do incredible things, but that in the world we're in, we also need the ethics and understanding what we're doing with it. But I'll quote him here. He added this. He said, "The good news is that there's an increasing number of people that are dealing with the ethics of AI and dealing with the ethics of all of our behaviors and how we develop technology responsibly to make sure our privacy is protected and that our fundamental civil rights are protected and that algorithms can be biased, and we need to know that." So what was interesting is we then talked about, obviously I'm going to probe on digital anthropology. I probed him a little bit about this. And we talked about digital villages and the way we live in digital villages. And why is maybe studying digital villages, protecting the people, maybe an added way to go? Well, as we mentioned, what Alan talked about in social justice is who's standing up for those people? Who's the scientist in the room whose focus is empathy? Well, that needs to be digital anthropologists. We need to increase this degree program. There are only 2 universities in the world that graduate a PhD in digital anthropology. You need ethnography research methods to change. These things have to change if we're going to have leaders advised with scientists who understand ethics, understand empathy, understand human behavior in the digital world. And so we're excited to see the confluence coming together around this. And then finally, to bring it home to marketing, I had spoke with Katie King, and she is the author of a book. Did I get that? Yes. She's the author. Oh, I could look right here. She's the author of a book entitled Using Artificial Intelligence in Marketing, How to Harness AI and Maintain a Competitive Edge. She just really had practical things to say. She was very practical. When she talked about these 3 Ds, the dirty, dull, and dangerous, she says, how do you use AI to simplify like you had 1,000 interns, those kinds of things. That there's a tremendous amount of that in marketing, in that whole issue. And actually, in most businesses, there's a lot of that. How do we use AI to do those kind of things? And she was talking about that and really emphasizing that those things are out there and possible. Then she led to the next thing, and it had to do with how we lead companies and how we think about using AI in the companies. And really that marketers tend to want to bring all the tools right away, and yet they are the ones pushing a lot of the company to try to adopt. And it gets difficult to push it in from that way. She was really advocating that the CEO at the top needs to be the one who's committed to changing an organization and adopting AI and these practices. That's the way change is going to happen. He's the only, or he or she tends to be the only one with the authority and the broad view in order to make sure those kind of change happen. So she gave this illustration about a restaurant scenario that what's possible with you if you employ AI properly. And it had to do with you walking into a restaurant and people at the reception, since they have made a reservation, they know who you are, they understand what you like, maybe you've been there before, they help you, they know you're vegan, they know your birthday. That all goes into this whole marketing change as you walk in. Now, sometimes that can be a little creepy, but when you think about it, there's a lot of consumers that want that high touch. Just like before, when you went to the same place, they knew you. That wasn't creepy. That made you feel nice because that butcher knew you. He knows how you like your food. So in a lot of ways, we want that personalized service, but it has to be done in the right way. So she was highlighting this fact that really it's the users bring it into companies and they step on the toes of the IT leaders and the CTOs, and then you have this battle. So it's over a wholesale change needs to happen in an organization because marketers want innovations. Marketers are out there trying to figure out how to reach the consumers, how to create great content, and she's advocating that organizations also need to change to be able to allow this kind of innovation to come, that really there's a huge disruptor happening. Then she went on to talk, obviously, on my favorite topic of digital anthropology. We did talk about that, and she had a lot of interesting things to say about discrimination and the problems at the moment that algorithms can create. So she too had a very strong opinion about bias and what that means and how these ethical issues are opening up this democratization of data versus exploitation of data. And really, where's the boundaries between the two? We already see these dangers. It was highlighted about Cambridge Analytica and the dangers that created. So we know they're there, that there's a dark side to this amount of data and to data science and exploiting the public. But where is that boundary? Where's the boundary between connecting and doing a great job of advertising and marketing versus exploiting? And this is where we need scientists who study this, who think about this, who advise the leaders properly. So then I asked her to give her final verdict on AI in the marketing field, and she's like, don't be frightened about it. She says, assess how it's being used in your job function, in your industry, in your sector, in your country. Read, keep up to date. And she's been talking about this book. So again, same topic, right? Stay curious and keep learning because these innovations are happening. So overall, when we talk about this, there is a movement. Creativity and marketing is changing because of artificial intelligence and the access of tremendous amounts of data. But what's happening in these things create two different pillars. One is all this data. Should we have it? How do we get access to it? What do we do with it? Are we allowed to exploit? Is it exploitation? So that's one very, very important pillar. And in all that, the second pillar is human science. Human science needs to take main stage when it comes to how data is reviewed. Yes, we need analytics, and yes, we need data science to find these villages. But who's qualified to really analyze and study these villages? We see that as digital anthropology. And that will change the face of creativity, that will change the face of marketing. Digital anthropology brings together those disparate disciplines and specializations and needs to enhance its tools and research capabilities, really to intertwine that. So if there's anything from this, the creative intelligence and what's happening is showing that digital anthropologies are professionals who we need as they learn and they reflect on what we have in a new light. Or we're going to end up in a space where we don't want to be. We need that degree in ethics. We need that kind of thinking to join together with what we do with data. So that's the point of what we've been learning, and I'm excited to be here. Again, I'm James Ingram, and I'm excited to be part of this industry. And thank you again, Pamro, for inviting me to be here as well.
Thank you, James. Really interesting stuff this morning, and it's tied together really nicely with Orestes's presentation, Alan, so it's all gelled. And there's some real thought-provoking stuff from the 5G to the AI. I would like to go into a restaurant and they know I like the ceviche and which Sauvignon Blanc, and then they could recommend, something else that I like as well. My friend Clara Neal and I go to Michelin stars. Imagine if they knew all of that about us. I wouldn't find it creepy at all. And that's the way it's going, guys. Yes, so we need to harness all of the benefits and take the good out of it and also protect from the dark side.